You have probably never lived in a world where you couldn't be alone. There is always someone nearby, a family member, a neighbor, a friend, a stranger passing through. But for most of human history, privacy was not a room you could lock. It was a place you had to find. Around 50,000 years ago, a small human group could spend weeks moving through a landscape together. They shared food, fires, tools, sleeping areas, and information. Archaeological studies show that Paleolithic living spaces were often organized into distinct activity areas around hearths, suggesting that people already divided space according to what they were doing. But there was no bedroom, no bathroom, no closed door, no concept of disappearing for an hour because you needed to be alone. So when you needed privacy, where did you go? The answer was not always far away. Sometimes, it was only a few meters from everyone else, and that changes how you understand one of the most ordinary things in your life. Your need to be alone may be far older than civilization itself. Around 40,000 years ago, humans were already using caves and rock shelters across Europe and Asia, but these places were not necessarily single open rooms. Archaeologists can sometimes identify different zones inside them. One area was used for fire, another for making tools, another for processing food. Some areas were used for sleeping or resting. The division was not marked by walls, it was marked by behavior. You knew where people gathered, you knew where tools were being made, you knew where someone was sleeping, and you knew when you were entering someone's space. That's not the whole story. At Konitra, in the Golan Heights, archaeologists found evidence from around 540,000 years ago showing deliberate spatial organization at an open-air Middle Paleolithic site. Different activities appear to have been concentrated in different areas, suggesting that dividing social space was not something humans invented recently. But organized space is not necessarily privacy. You can have separate work areas and still have everyone watching you. The real question is whether ancient humans deliberately created places where other people were not expected to follow. One clue comes from caves. In 2018, researchers studying Paleolithic cave art developed methods for analyzing visibility and movement through decorated caves. At Chauvet Cave in Spain, their analysis identified spaces that could be interpreted as more public and others that were comparatively private. That distinction matters, because a cave can contain something a village cannot easily provide. Distance without leaving the community. You could walk deeper into darkness. The firelight would disappear behind you. Voices would become quieter. The entrance would shrink into the distance. And for a few minutes, you could be physically separated from everyone else. But here's where it gets stranger. Some of the deepest parts of Paleolithic caves were not comfortable places to live at all. They were dark, humid, and difficult to reach. Researchers studying decorated caves note that these inner zones were generally poor environments for prolonged habitation compared with areas near the entrance. Yet humans kept entering them, sometimes hundreds of meters underground, sometimes carrying fire, sometimes leaving artwork behind. Whatever they were doing there, it was not simply finding a warmer bedroom. It suggests that humans had already discovered something much more fundamental. Distance itself could change the meaning of a place. And once you understood that, you didn't need a wall to create privacy. You only needed somewhere other people were willing to leave you alone. One of the clearest clues comes from the way ancient people organized their camps. At Dolní Věstonice, in what is now the Czech Republic, people were living around 30,000 years ago during the Ice Age. Archaeologists have found hearths, stone tools, animal remains, and structures that suggest different activities took place in different parts of the settlement. You were not necessarily doing everything in one place. Someone could prepare food near one fire. Another person could work stone somewhere else. A family could sleep in a separate shelter. The camp had boundaries, even when it had no streets or walls. But here's the important part. Privacy doesn't require complete isolation. You only need enough distance to stop someone from constantly monitoring you. Modern psychologists call this personal space, and humans are extremely sensitive to it. But the instinct itself is much older than modern cities. When you step away from a crowded group, your behavior changes. You speak differently. You think differently. You can work without being watched. You can rest without responding to anyone. Ancient humans would have experienced the same basic separation, even though they had no word for privacy. Except there was a problem. Leaving the group could be dangerous. A person walking away from camp was also walking away from protection. Around 15,000 years ago, people living in parts of Europe were still exposed to predators, rival groups, harsh weather, and accidents in the landscape. The farther you moved from camp, the longer it would take for anyone to help. So privacy came with a cost. You had to balance the need to be alone against the need to remain close to everyone else. This may explain why natural features were so useful. A large rock, a bend in a river, a dense patch of vegetation, a narrow passage. Even a small depression in the ground could block someone's view. You didn't need to build a wall. You only needed to disappear from sight, and humans became remarkably good at doing this. At prehistoric sites, archaeologists sometimes find evidence that activity areas were separated by physical features or differences in elevation. The landscape itself became part of the architecture. But here's where it gets stranger. Privacy wasn't only about escaping other people, it could also be about escaping the noise of the group. Imagine a Paleolithic camp at night. A fire is burning, people are talking, someone is preparing food, children are moving around, tools are being repaired, dogs, if the group kept them, could be making noise. You might be surrounded by dozens of people. For a species that spends so much of its life communicating, silence would have been unusual. So humans had another option. They could move toward places where the landscape naturally absorbed sound. Dense vegetation, rock shelters, small valleys, cave chambers. These places didn't just hide your body, they reduced your presence, and that may have mattered more than we realize. Because ancient humans were not constantly surrounded by strangers, they were surrounded by people they knew. Family, partners, children, older relatives, hunting companions. That makes privacy even more interesting. You don't need privacy only from enemies. Sometimes you need distance from the people you love. Anthropologists studying modern hunter-gatherer societies have documented periods when individuals temporarily separate from the group for hunting, gathering, resting, or other activities. These modern examples cannot be directly projected onto Paleolithic people, but they demonstrate that small-scale societies can maintain strong social bonds without requiring constant physical proximity. The group can remain connected, while individuals move apart. That's not the whole story, because there was one place where ancient humans could achieve something even more powerful than physical distance. They could create a space that everyone understood was not for everyone. And that idea may be hiding in the deepest chambers of prehistoric caves. Deep inside some prehistoric caves, the rules of ordinary life seem to change. At Chauvet Cave in southern France, people entered chambers more than 30,000 years ago and created hundreds of images of animals. Some paintings are hundreds of meters from the entrance, in places that receive no natural sunlight. You could not simply walk into these chambers casually. You needed fire, you needed to know the route, and you needed a reason to go that far underground. At Lascaux, in France, the situation was similar. The famous paintings date to roughly 17,000 years ago, and many are located in areas that were difficult to reach and completely dark without artificial light. These weren't comfortable living spaces. They weren't places where you would normally prepare food or sleep, yet people repeatedly entered them. Why? We cannot know for certain. Archaeologists have proposed ritual activities, storytelling, symbolic communication, initiation, and other possibilities. But the physical structure tells us something important. The deeper you went, the fewer people could casually follow. That creates a form of privacy that does not require a door. It requires effort. If someone wanted to interrupt you, they had to make the decision to follow you. That distinction still exists today. A closed bedroom door creates privacy because another person has to deliberately open it. A cave chamber could create privacy because another person had to deliberately walk into the darkness. The technology was primitive, the social concept was not, but there is another possibility. Some secluded places may not have been used for privacy at all. They may have been used for things that required secrecy. Those are different. Privacy means you are temporarily separated from other people. Secrecy means you are controlling what other people know. And prehistoric humans clearly had the ability to control information. At Blombos Cave in South Africa, people were engraving ochre objects around 75,000 years ago. At Cueva de los Ovuornes in Spain, researchers have found evidence of symbolic behavior dating to roughly 115,000 years ago. These discoveries show that humans were creating objects whose meaning may not have been obvious to everyone. Some knowledge belonged to certain people. Some objects may have had special significance. Some activities may have been deliberately restricted. We cannot reconstruct the exact social rules, but the pattern suggests that human life was already more complicated than simply living together around a fire. You could belong to a group, and still have things that belonged only to you. That may be the deeper origin of privacy. Not walls, not houses, not locks, but the recognition that another human being has an inner world you cannot automatically enter. For hundreds of thousands of years, humans lived in groups where cooperation was essential. You needed other people to hunt. You needed them to defend the camp. You needed them to care for children. You needed them when someone became injured or sick. Complete isolation was dangerous, but complete exposure was probably uncomfortable. So humans developed a compromise. Stay connected, but sometimes step away. Move behind the rock. Walk beyond the firelight. Enter the darker part of the cave. Find a place where nobody follows unless they have a reason. Eventually, humans would build houses, then rooms, then doors, then locks. Modern privacy would become something you could construct from wood, stone, and metal. But the underlying instinct was already ancient. Your bedroom is only the latest version of an idea that may have existed tens of thousands of years ago. The first private room may not have had 4 walls. It may have been a quiet corner of a cave, a patch of forest, a place beyond the firelight, a few minutes of walking away from everyone else. And perhaps that is why the need for privacy feels so natural today. Long before humans learned how to build walls, we learned something much simpler. Sometimes, being part of the group means needing somewhere the group cannot follow.